Carl Gustav Jung, and I'd like to talk tonight about the things which I feel to be his enduring contributions toward the science of psychology, of which he was such a great master.
Of the psychologists who've dealt with these problems, and there have been many, for me, Carl Jung says the most.
One of the lesser-known things about the psychologist Carl Jung is the fact that he had a near-death experience. In his book Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, he describes a misadventure he had in 1944 where he broke his foot and had a heart attack that sent him to the hospital. While he was there, he was under the care of a man named Dr. H. Jung almost died, but he didn't call it a near-death experience because the term didn't actually exist back then, and it wouldn't until 1975, more than 30 years later, when Dr. Raymond Moody coined the term NDE in his pioneering book, Life After Life. But for Carl Jung, his near-death experience was life-changing. He describes floating high up in space, seeing the earth below him bathed in a glorious blue light, and a feeling of bliss that filled his whole being as he watched the oceans, continents, and snow-covered Himalayas far above the earth, feeling completely at peace. As he drifted through space, he saw a huge block of stone about the size of his house, like a meteorite. He floated towards it, moving closer and closer until he was able to step right onto the stone. It was here that he saw a mysterious entrance leading into a small antechamber. And then he realized the truth. This wasn't a meteor at all. It was a temple. And sitting next to the entrance was a Hindu man, dressed in a brilliant white gown who sat on a stone bench in the lotus position. As Jung approached the steps leading into the temple, a strange thing happened. A painful process where everything about his former self was stripped away. All the core parts of who he thought he was suddenly removed. What was left behind was his true essence. He writes that it was as if I now carried along with me everything I'd ever experienced. Everything that happened around me, it was with me, and I was it. I realized that this is what I am. I am this bundle of what has been and what's been accomplished. In that moment, there was nothing he wanted. There was no regret, only peace. In finding himself now in a place without time, he says that we shy away from the word eternal, but I can describe the experience only as the ecstasy of a non-temporal state in which present, past, and future are one. Everything that happens in time had been brought together into one concrete whole. As he moved forward, Jung felt a sudden certainty that he was about to go into an illuminated room where he would finally understand what his life had meant. He would know everyone who came before him, why he'd come into being, and where his life was now flowing towards. It would all be revealed to him, and he would learn why everything in his life happened the way it did. But all of a sudden, the image of Dr. H appeared in front of him. He was framed in a golden laurel wreath. Dr. H came to send a message that Jung wasn't meant to stay here, that there was more for him to do, and it was now time for him to go back to Earth. In an instant, Jung was back in his body, lying in his hospital bed. All he could feel was the disappointment of not being allowed to go into the temple. All of the questions he had about the universe and his place within it would, at least for now, remain unanswered. But that feeling of disappointment would soon be replaced by something else, fear. Jung now had a sudden premonition that Dr. H was about to die. He had the feeling that Dr. H would then take Jung's place in the afterlife. Jung tried to explain this to the doctor. He tried to convince him of all the things he'd seen in his near-death experience, but Dr. H dismissed it. Inexplicably, Jung was right. On April 4th, 1944, Dr. H suddenly fell ill and soon afterwards died of septicemia. He was a good doctor and a good man. This experience affected Jung deeply. He writes that his whole perspective changed. A fruitful period of work began for me. A good many of my principal works were written only then. I no longer tried to put across my own opinion, but surrendered myself to the current of my thoughts. Thus, one problem after another revealed itself to me and took shape. Among these was Jung's work with synchronicity. Synchronicities are meaningful coincidences that happen when an inner state of the mind lines up with an event in the outside world. They're not connected by cause and effect, they're connected by meaning. What might be the most famous example is the patient who told Jung a dream she had about a scarab beetle, and at exactly that moment, a beetle flew into the room. Jung tells us that the key thing that defines synchronicity is the sense of the numinous, the feeling of awe and wonder that lifts us outside of ourselves. It's the realization that we're part of something far greater than we could ever be on our own. Synchronicities give us hints of the powerful and mysterious ways in which we're all connected in a single underlying unified reality that Jung called Unus Mundus, which is Latin for one world. What's interesting is that there seems to be a connection between near-death experiences and synchronicity. Dr. Bruce Greyson, a psychiatrist and one of the leading NDE researchers in the world, wrote an article called Meaningful Coincidences and Near-Death Experiences. In it, he describes a major research finding: the fact that people who've had near-death experiences report having way more synchronicities in their lives after coming back from their NDEs. For some reason, even those who tended to be very skeptical people before their NDEs suddenly experienced many more meaningful coincidences after coming back from the brink of dying. Why would synchronicities and near-death experiences be related to each other? One clue can be found in what's called the life review. It's sometimes described as the sense of having your whole life flash before your eyes. Life reviews happen when we come close to death and suddenly relive the events of our lives in incredible detail. Some people describe it as though they're reading the pages of a book or watching scenes from a movie. Others describe it as literally re-experiencing everything that's ever happened to them. What's amazing about the life review is that many people report seeing things not only from their own point of view, but also through the eyes of the people around them, experiencing things from the perspective of everyone they've met, as it happened to them, allowing them to understand just how their thoughts and actions profoundly affected the people in their lives. One of the best examples of this comes from the story of Barbara Harris Whitfield. Barbara is an author and therapist who also served as a researcher at the University of Connecticut Medical School for the International Association for Near-Death Studies. She's also had 2 powerful near-death experiences of her own, and for much of her life, she was a self-described atheist. In her book, Final Passage, Barbara explains that she was born with scoliosis, which is a curve in her spine. By the time she was 32 years old, it became so painful, she had to go to the hospital for surgery. She also remembers having to use a striker frame circle bed. And then one day, she suddenly lost all consciousness. Without explanation, she woke up in the hallway in the middle of the night. And then she realized that somehow she was outside of her body. She floated back into her room, where she saw herself in bed. Everything went black. She found herself drifting in a place of total darkness. Out of nowhere, she felt the warmth of 2 arms wrapping themselves around her in a wonderful embrace. She realized that these were the arms of her grandmother, who she used to call Bubby. Her grandmother had been dead for 14 years, and yet somehow, Barbara knew it was her. Suddenly, she re-experienced every moment that she shared with her grandmother in their 19 years together. This time, Barbara saw everything not only from her own point of view, but also through her grandmother's eyes. She could feel exactly what they both felt as they lived these moments together again. Only now, she understood everything that they'd meant to each other. Barbara remembers one of her favorite scenes when she was 4 years old, helping her grandmother cook dinner in the kitchen. There was a feeling of excitement in the air because the whole family was coming over for dinner. Her grandmother pulled a heavy wooden chair from the table so that Barbara could stand on it and reach the counter. She put a mixture of fish and batter into Barbara's tiny hands, and she rolled it into a ball and then dropped it into a pot of boiling water. The kitchen was warm and filled with delicious smells of cooking food. After they finished, her grandmother pushed Barbara around on the chair in the kitchen like an exhilarating ride, and they both laughed with joy. Barbara then watched her grandmother cut a piece of lemon in half and rub it onto Barbara's hands, cleaning them. She looked at Barbara with such love in her eyes and said, "Don't move. Bubby will be right back." She came back with a hairbrush and brushed Barbara's hair for what felt like ages. It felt so good. That evening, when the family sat down for dinner, her grandmother told everyone that Barbara had made the fish. Everyone was so impressed, and as they tasted it, they all gushed at what a good cook Barbara was. When their memories of each other came to an end, Barbara stayed with her grandmother for a long time. But then somewhere within the darkness, Barbara felt herself being pulled away. It was time for her to go. She understood that this place was eternal and that her grandmother would be waiting for her when it was time for her to come back again. Now she felt a new energy coming out from within the darkness, something far away, made up of shades of gray that became almost white. It turned into a brilliant light that was now coming towards her, and she heard the sound of a low droning noise as she felt herself being taken into the light. And then, in a blinding flash, Barbara was back in her body in the hospital. This experience completely changed her. Barbara writes that, "I realized when I almost died that we don't end at our skin. Our energy fields overlap with other people in our lives. We're all connected in a huge dance of consciousness. And we're not just human, we're spirit. We were spirit before we came into this lifetime. We're all struggling spirits now. And when we finish our journey in this lifetime, we will be pure spirit again." If this reminds you of Carl Jung's idea of a single unified reality in Unus Mundus, that's no accident. Because one of the ways this reality is revealed to us is through synchronicity. Barbara writes that synchronicities are linking coincidences that happen often enough to make us realize that our lives are deeply woven from a higher awareness. And in much the same way that synchronicities show us glimpses of all the ways we're connected, the life review that millions of near-death experiencers speak about show us that our sense of separateness is also an illusion. It shows us that we're more than just our bodies, and there's a higher consciousness that links all of us together. There are signs all around us of this profound connection we all share. And Barbara isn't the only one. The Harvard neurosurgeon Dr. Eben Alexander also points to the profound synchronicities he found at the heart of his own near-death experience, completely transforming him from a skeptic into a believer. If you'd like to see more of Dr. Eben Alexander's astonishing journey into the afterlife, click on the video appearing now on the left side of your screen. And I would absolutely love it if you left a comment with a grandmother emoji. And press the like button if you enjoyed this. It really helps the channel. I look forward to reading your thoughts on synchronicity and the afterlife in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.